Hi, it's Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and you're listening to Job Search Radio. You know, writing a resume is one of the things most people really detest doing. And I haven't had a show in a while where I address resume writing. So I reached out to Debra Mastic, an expert resume writer with a new book out, and asked her to spend some time talking about what goes into a great resume. And she also makes a very strong case at the beginning for why you should hire a resume writer to do it for you and save yourself the time and the agony. There are lots of little nuances to resume writing that she really addresses in this interview. So listen to the show in depth, and I think you'll find it a very helpful experience for you. Maybe you hire a resume writer, maybe you decide to do it yourself, but you're going to learn something from this show that I think will really help. So before we go into the interview, I just want to say if you like this one, visit iTunes, or if you're listening to it on Stitcher or TuneIn or some other service, give the show a great review, 5 stars. It helps other people discover Job Search Radio. So I hope you enjoyed today's show, and before we start, let's sing together.
Are you looking for a new job or interested in leveling up? Job Search Radio is your go-to resource for insider tips on job hunting and growing your career. Here's your host, Jeff Altman.
So my guest is Debra Mastic, the founder and owner of Virtual Resume Coach, a company that provides innovative and affordable resume and LinkedIn services, and the best-selling author of The Common Sense Resume. Debra, welcome to Job Search Radio. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I want to ask a question that people ask me sometimes, and that is, why should I pay to have someone write a resume for me when I can do it?
That's a great question. So, a lot of people get frustrated with the resume writing process because, it may feel like a moving target. One employer wants your resume to look this way. Another employer wants your resume to look that way. And, you don't want to be judged on your ability to write a resume. I spent years researching information design and how resumes can navigate through the hiring pipeline. And, one thing I'm great at is understanding your story and filtering what your resume readers, the recruiters, and the hiring managers are going to want to see on your resume. It's really hard to go beyond your own perspective and put yourself in the resume reader's shoes.
And I know that's so important. You used the term I want to make sure people understand, and that was the pipeline. What did you mean by that term?
So most companies have a hiring pipeline, and that is because so many people apply for jobs, and they have to find a good way to manage that. So the first, I call it a roadblock in the hiring pipeline, is the applicant tracking system. And that's that computer system database that when you apply for a job online, you upload your resume to that. The next part of the hiring pipeline is recruiters. And they are kind of the first line of defense. They're going to look at if they're interested in you, they're going to, make a match or no match decision and then push you along to the hiring manager, who is the third roadblock in the hiring pipeline. And
that decision is going to take folks between as little as 3 seconds and as much as 10. Ooh. So you don't have a lot of time to make a positive impression. And because negative is the way we're all predisposed, because we're all trained. Most of what we're looking at is garbage. Why do we think that way? Because it is. So you have to recognize that we make quick decisions, almost like triage in combat. So we've got this pipeline of the applicant tracking system, the third party, or the corporate or third party recruiter, and then the hiring manager. So that's how we start this little dance through it. So when you're constructing a resume, how are you doing it? What sort of ways do you look at it in putting it together?
Well, in regards to the hiring pipeline, one thing I keep in mind is with the applicant tracking system, when you upload your resume to that and it hopefully moves on to the next level, the recruiter is not actually seeing your resume at first. They're going to see a bird's eye view of your application, and if that shows potential, then they'll pull your resume. So I always keep that in mind, and when you're applying for a job, you can get filtered based on your location. So if you're more than 25 miles away, you may not even have a chance at the job, because that applicant tracking system is going to filter people who are closer to the actual job location. So, I try to keep everything in mind. I try to, recruiters, again, they spend about 8 to 10 seconds scanning your resume before making a decision. So one thing I like to keep in mind is tailoring your resume to the job ad. And that doesn't just mean, changing a couple words to make sure your word matches the job ad wording. It means if there's a piece of information at the bottom of your resume, but that is a critical requirement in the job ad, you pull that up to the top of your resume to make it easy to find. So it's not just about, adapting your language. It's about reorganizing and prioritizing information on your resume. So it's very easy for that recruiter to see in 8 to 10 seconds and then say, okay, they meet the basic requirements. I'm comfortable moving this person on to the hiring manager.
For most of you folks, you already know no one prints out resumes to read them. We're all looking at a screen to evaluate a resume. And if you're going to ask someone to page down 3 or 4 times to find the information, you're kidding yourself if you believe that that's going to happen, because it doesn't. Like Debra says, you want that information in a prominent role at the beginning of your resume, so it's obvious to folks that you have the experience that's being sought. And I think applicant tracking systems work that way too. They kind of want to see things at the beginning of the document. Is that your impression?
What I've seen with applicant tracking systems is sometimes they are programmed to filter by keywords often. So there will be critical keywords that they are scanning for in the application. And, sometimes, again, it's by your location, so they're looking for that zip code. But I've also found that recruiters at companies use applicant tracking systems a little differently. So again, some will do that Boolean keyword search, but some will just go into the system and just pick the 10 top resumes or applications that are just at the top without doing any sort of filtering or ranking. So one thing that's good is when you see a job you want to apply for as quickly as possible so there's less competition in front of you to worry about.
Agreed. And I know some of the systems go so far as to score resumes so that a reader gets the idea that this is an 85% match or a 23% match, with the result being, part of that is the frequency of the use of terms, how you language those terms in the resume, and where you position those terms. So their belief is that if it's on page 3, you probably haven't done it very recently. So
that's a good call out.
Thank you. So what sort of advice do you have for job hunters as they're constructing resumes for the applicant tracking system? Is there a particular type of advice that you give them when constructing a resume?
There's a lot of advice out there about, how to, don't use text boxes or, different types of tips like that. But one thing I've always taught people is to fill out the application thoroughly. So when you upload your resume, don't always trust the system to parse it for you in the application boxes. Do that yourself. And if you have a great resume that you have tailored to that specific job, just copy and paste it and manually upload or manually fill out the application. I think that's the most effective way.
And one reminder I want to give people is that so many folks these days don't put an address, city, state, zip code on a resume. And once you're doing an upload, folks, how are they ever going to find you again when a new position opens up unless you have your zip code in there? Seriously. When we go searching for resumes, there used to be 2 ways we could find a resume: area code, zip code. Well, good news, phone numbers are portable. So no matter where you are, you take your mobile with you and it works fine. Bad news is area code is irrelevant. So we're stuck with zip codes and you folks are not putting where you live on your resume. So it becomes impossible that unless people respond to that first job you apply for, you're just dead data to them. They'll never find you again. So make sure you get that on when your resume is parsed in the system. So are there other things that you encourage people to do?
Yeah, one thing that's really important that a lot of people overlook is really reading between the lines in a job ad. So what happens with job ads is many of them are poorly written because lesser information or less important information is at the top, and your requirements are usually at the bottom. So a mistake people make is, trying to tailor their resume to the responsibilities listed at the top. And the problem with that is, employers know that certain responsibilities are associated with the job title. So people focus on the responsibilities and miss out on those critical requirements that employers are looking for. The other thing I noticed too is when you're looking at a job ad, employers will often write the same skill over and over again using different wording. So I try to teach people to look for patterns in job ads. If you see the same type of skill written several different ways, the employer is obviously trying to communicate the desire for that certain skill. So I try to look for patterns and then condense the skills or requirements and then make sure those are communicated at the top of my resume.
Cool. And we're going to be back with more from Debra in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsor.
Do you have a question about your job search? Well, you're not alone. Most people do. But most people make the mistake of asking the wrong people for advice. Friends, family, maybe a former manager who, frankly, doesn't have much more experience than you do. Yeah, a former manager or a friend or a family member may have hired some people, but how many have they really hired? 5 people? 10? Maybe they've changed jobs a bunch of times if they were a consultant before. I'm someone who's filled more than 1,200 positions plus consulting assignments. So I have a very unique perspective on job hunting, and it helps so many people find their next piece of work. So I'll simply say, rather than ask the wrong people for advice, schedule some time with me through my website, which is thebiggamehunter.us. See the tab on the top that says, have your job search questions answered? Click the link, schedule some time with me. I'll be able to help you negotiate through this situation.
Okay, we're back. So let's just pick up where we left off with Debra, and we were talking about resumes and the applicant tracking systems. So you were saying that firms sometimes lay out the same requirements or description in 2 or 3 different directions. Now, I want to go past applying for one job, because the probability is that people are not applying for one job. They're looking at 5 or 10 jobs for the sake of argument. So you want them to tailor resumes for each role, right?
Yes.
Cool. And I can't give you a simpler question than this one. Why is that important?
What's interesting, if you look at the job title, the same job title at 3 different companies, the requirements are very diverse, and I've learned that very few requirements actually overlap for the same job title. So the problem is when you try to write a resume for a job title, you are not going to come across as the perfect candidate for that specific position. And truly, to get through this very competitive hiring pipeline, it is best to tailor your resume to individual job ads. And I know that takes time, but in my opinion, submitting a few quality resumes is better than submitting a bunch of, generic resumes. So quality over quantity there.
Agree wholeheartedly. If you send the same resume out to every single job, it's like the broken watch that's right twice a day.
Yeah, and recruiters can spot, a generic resume a mile away, and it doesn't impress them.
No question about it. And that's true both corporate or third party. If you think your cover letter is going to cover it up, it doesn't work, because employers basically pause and go, okay, if they really did this, why didn't they put it into the resume? It's obviously not something they do all the time, or they have particular strength or acumen with. So they want to see it in the resume. Mm-hmm. So I agree about tailoring wholeheartedly. Now, we've been talking about the applicant tracking system, but there are actually human beings behind there. So let's assume that we've gotten past the ATS, and now we're in the hands of a recruiter. It doesn't matter if it's corporate or third party, it's finally in their hands.
Yeah.
So what are they looking for? How do you want to ensnare them?
Well, that's a great question. So recruiters, they're kind of like the first line of defense. Their job is to find candidates that seem like a good match for both the company and the job and the team they're going to be working on, and to weed out bad apples, because they don't want that hiring manager to make a bad hiring decision. They hire someone who doesn't work out and they're back to square one. So, recruiters, again, they're experts at scanning resumes. They're very skeptical. They're used to seeing a lot of bull crap on resumes. So, they look for those very specific details and the context around your responsibilities that really build your credibility, and said, that person probably really did work on that project and was a team player. And they're analytical. So they may see something on your resume. If they see a gap in employment, they're going to just start, in their own head thinking, well, why did that happen? So it's really important to, when you write your resume, try to think of what are they going to be thinking as they read my resume? What questions are they going to have? And just to stay ahead of that.
You're so right about it. I received a resume today from someone, and he had gaps in his background. And apparently he's been asked about it a number of times. And, in his cover note to me, he said, just so you know, the reason I have gaps here is I went for my doctoral. I was working on the thesis. So you'll see an 18-month gap while this was going on. But, it was only for that reason. No one's fired me. My references are great. They did that in a cover note to me. So, being proactive and anticipating the questions that people have is really a smart strategy to employ.
And one of the things I try to tell people, if you do have a gap, so something happens where you lose your job or you're not working, one of the best things you can do is do freelancing. So get on freelancer.com. You may not have full-time work, but continue to work on projects. And in your free time, do as much ongoing development as you have time to do. And that goes a long way.
Agreed. There's also Upwork.com. Both of them compete with one another. And the idea is, whether you take a course, whether you are doing some freelance work, you have a way of explaining what you've been doing while you're looking for work, rather than just simply having a gap sitting there as though you were watching TV for 3 months during that time.
Yeah.
So it's always good to fill the time, and you're going to be a lot sharper when you're actually interviewing by doing this. Mm-hmm. So we've got those evil HR people reading resumes, looking for some reason to reject. We know that's what they're doing. They want to reject because they don't want to get into trouble with the line manager who will say those fateful words. Why did you send that person to me? and as a result, HR people are rarely praised and more often criticized. Mm-hmm. And that's true of third-party recruiters as well. So you're finally you've transcended HR and the applicant tracking system, and you're in the hiring manager's hand. Praise the Lord! What happens then? What are they looking at differently?
So, the hiring manager, they have more of a stake in the hiring process. So, unlike the recruiter, they're going to actually have to work with and manage the person they hire. And they're probably also more familiar with the position. So they may be able to pick out some things that the recruiter wasn't able to pick out. So when your resume makes it to the hiring manager, you're probably in the same boat as people with the same hard skills. So you meet all those hard skill requirements. What your resume really needs to do is show why your experience is better quality, and maybe why you have better soft skills, why you're more favorable and to work with and a better team player. And a lot of people, they get a little nervous about putting soft skills on a resume because they are hard to describe. How do you say you have great verbal communication skills or great written communication skills? So one thing I like to teach is a formula. When you have like a soft skill like problem solver, use the formula accomplished X by doing Y, resulting in Z. So that kind of just brings more light to that soft skill, and just instead of just listing problem solver with no context.
Could you repeat that algebraic formula for people, please?
This is as mathematical as I get, but accomplished X by doing Y, resulting in Z. And let's see if I have an example here. So I have an example. So again, if you say problem solver on your resume, and this is just a very entry-level example. So increased productivity by 67%, that's the accomplishment, by reorganizing the stock room. So that's how I did it. And what did it result in? To enable stockroom assistants to unpack and price merchandise faster. So that's an example for someone who was working on the sales floor, and he had to keep coming off the sales floor to help unpack merchandise, and he was losing sales because they had to get the merchandise out before the sales. So he took the initiative to be a problem solver there, and he just made a meaningful connection for the hiring manager.
Gotcha. I know with senior people, I use what I nicknamed the Italian recipe, because the acronym spells out PARM. That's problem, action, result, metrics.
I love that.
Yeah. So
it's easy to remember.
I was interviewing Ron Nash for the show. He went as problem, action, result. I said, let's make it Italian. Let's get a metrics in there.
Okay, I need to make mine line up with food now.
That's funny. So they're looking for something you want to give them something that's going to draw them in, because the document is relatively flat otherwise.
Yeah.
So you want to be addressing how you solve problems for other people. Is that right?
Yeah, those soft skills and how you are easy to work with, whether you're a good communicator or a great team player. You really need to mesh with the existing team, and you want to also have skills that can maybe elevate the rest of the team. So are you bringing a new skill set you can teach and mentor the existing team?
I've seen resumes sometimes where people intersperse what almost seems like reference quotes in the resume. So it says, Joe was it's almost like one of the LinkedIn endorsements. Joe was a terrific individual on the team. He was a great team player. He helped us accomplish so much by, and then below it is the name and the title and organization. Do you see any value to people doing that kind of stuff?
I don't see value on the resume. I see the resume as a tool that gets your foot in the door, makes an introduction, and gets people to want to learn more about you. That's why you move on to the interview. A lot of the time, those quotes, they're so just wordy and verbose, and they don't seem like they come from the heart. Yeah, so I really don't see a lot of value on the resume for that.
Thank you. Now, you wrote a book called The Common Sense Resume. Mm-hmm. What makes it a common sense resume versus the average resume?
Well, something funny is there's all these rules about resume writing on the internet, and people will be like, oh, I need to follow this rule so my resume is successful. So they do it, but there's never any reasoning behind why they should do that, because, sometimes it says, put a summary section on your resume. And if you think about it, your resume really is one big summary. So do you want to put a summary on top of a summary? And it just depends on the situation. So everything I teach in my book and to my clients is really backed up by a common sense explanation. That's really important to me.
I hate embedded headers on top of a page.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is back to the applicant tracking system. Not all ATSs will parse those particularly well.
Yes.
You have a belief about that when you talk to people?
Yeah, so I don't really use embedded headers on resumes. Something I like to teach is when you do your resume, your name's kind of the most focal point of your resume. That's the first place a recruiter is going to look. They're going to look to see your name, and then they're going to jump to your current experience. So one of my tips is instead of putting your contact information under your name, I say, why not put key qualifications that match the job requirements under there, just to kind of say to the recruiter, look, I meet a few of the basic requirements at minimum. Invest a little more time reading my resume, hoping it'll give that person a bit more of a chance. Because what happens is people use resume templates and they don't realize that it inadvertently buries critical requirements from the recruiters. So you may have X experience, but the resume template tells you to put it at the bottom of the page. And if your recruiter doesn't see that in 8 seconds, you may be passed over.
Agreed. I hate templates as well. Again, part of that parsing process. It makes it hard for people to see the resume. When it's being parsed, then there's missing data way too often. So whether it's an embedded header on the top or being impacted by the frames in the resume, it can be a problem. So I hate those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny they come up on the end of time with one another. I want to make sure we cover lots of good points here. So, balls in your court. What haven't it not been skillful enough to ask you about that we should be covering in our time with one another?
I think just understanding, when someone's going to read your resume, understanding, I call it a desire path. What is the information they're looking for? So a desire path is the shortest way to get to a destination. And what happens is sometimes when companies are making a new building or a new park, they'll make all these sidewalks. And what happens is there'll be a sidewalk that gets made out of the grass because people are like, I'm just going to walk through the grass to get to the building I want to go to. So I compare that to a resume. I like to set up a resume so that the recruiter or hiring managers is seeing information in the order they want to see it. So they don't have to jump around the page, and it's really efficient. So, they first look for your name, then they look for your current experience to see if you've actually done the job you're applying for. Then they'll glance at your past experience. Again, past experience is not as important as what you're currently doing. And then they're going to start looking for some of those requirements from the job ad. So yeah, you can do the job you're applying for, but do you have those critical requirements? So just keep that in mind, and that's why I really highly recommend using a 2-column format, so you can have your experience on one side, and right next to that is those skills or other qualifications they're looking for, so they don't get buried. It's all parallel.
Mm-hmm. I also, the notion of branding in resumes is important, but and that's really about how your resume presents things in ways that are congruent with what you claim to have experience with and with your LinkedIn profile. But I also want to remind you that one of your biggest branding elements is your employer name. So, for example, a person is advantaged if they say they work for, I'm going to pick 3 names at random, Google, Facebook, let's say Cisco, for the sake of argument, versus, hi, I work for 3 guys in a garage. We're in stealth mode because no one has ever placed an order with us before. So who you ultimately choose is going to be part of your personal branding, which I know isn't per se about resumes, except insofar as who you work for is going to influence their choice. So I sometimes will encourage people to boldface the employer if it's a good brand name, and thus call attention to it. Are there particular font sizes that you say people should work with, or font styles?
Well, I think you made a great point. People kind of fall into the trap of when they use a resume template, just because one word is bolded, they'll leave that bolded. What I try to teach is if that company name, if they say, hey, we're looking for someone with experience in the hospitality industry, then having that company name of Hyatt or whatever hospitality company you work for is more important to bold than maybe your job title. But if it's something that favors like the job title, then bold that over the company. And another example is a lot of people will bold the college they work or the college they went to when they should be bolding the degree, because that's what is listed as a requirement, a degree in computer science. So I recommend try not to go under 12-point font. When you go too small, it just makes your resume too hard, too much work to read. And I don't really have too much of an opinion on fonts. I always use very plain font. So.
I agree with you, because remember, if you're submitting it through an applicant tracking system, you want to have the system be able to read it, and there's certain font styles that are kind of common these days, but they're the best ones for the applicant tracking system to read. So don't get into italic style fonts. Avoid those. Comic type fonts. Those just look ridiculous under all circumstances. Stick with plain things like Arial, Calibri, Verdana. Not my favorite in terms of appearance, but good in terms of an applicant tracking system.
Yeah, and recruiters will tell you they don't really care about fancy looking resumes. They just want something that is easy to read and clear and shows how your experience connects to the job you're applying for.
Cool. So I want to thank you so much for making time today. How can people find out about you, your work, your book, everything about you?
First, thank you for having me. This was really fun. And you can visit my website, www.virtualresumecoach.com. That's my new company that I started. And my book, I have 2 books out. My newest book is The Common Sense Resume. And I wrote a book 2 years ago called The Game Changing Resume.
Terrific. Folks, I'll have links to that in the show notes, linking it back to Amazon for your convenience. So, Debra, thank you so much for making time today.
Thank you so much.
Folks, you're welcome. Folks, I'll be back next time with someone else who's going to be here to help you find work more quickly. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and I just want to say to you that looking for work doesn't have to be as hard, difficult, painful, or take as long as it often does. It's just you know how to do the job, but you don't know how to find a job. So I've got 3 ways that I can be of help to you. First of all is the notion of coaching, and that is working with you from beginning to end of your job search. Secondly, if you have questions about your search, just things aren't going right, and you just want to ask a couple of questions. If you visit my website, thebiggamehunter.us, you can find out about coaching. You can find out about how I can answer questions for you. And lastly, there's a job search makeover where I go through everything you've been doing up until this point, deconstruct it, and help put it back together again in ways that will help you be more effective. I hope you enjoyed this show. I'll be back next time real soon, and hope you have a great day. Take care.
For more job search advice, visit Jeff's website at thebiggamehunter.us. That's thebiggamehunter.us.